Hello, how to set your prices. I'm Bernard Keevy. I'm a profit growth specialist. So what are your main pricing options? You can work out your unit cost and then add on a markup. That's called cost plus markup. So if it costs you £1 on average to make something and you add on 50p, you would sell for £1.50. You'd have a 50% markup or a 50p markup. You could just copy your competitors, which basically means that you'll all end up competing on price. You could work out your hourly rate and then add a bit on, which again means that you can only earn so much because there's only so many hours in the day and so many hours in the week. Or you could say, well, what is what I sell worth to my customer? And it's down to not just the value to the customer, but the perceived value to the customer. And you can actually charge a different price to different categories of your customers if the different categories have a different perceived value of what you offer. And you can have things like packages, so you could have a platinum, gold and silver package, for example. And what you'll find there is that the majority of people go for the middle one. And because the majority go for the middle one, that would tend to increase your average price if at the moment your price is based around the silver element there. And you can do things like bundling. Now what bundling means is that you sell a package, if you like, of goods and services, and because they're bundled in together, one, it means that people are buying more off you and therefore spending more on average each time they buy, and you're spreading your overheads more thinly, which is good, it increases your profit. And secondly, it gets away from this competing on price dilemma, because it's more difficult to directly compare two different companies if they're both selling bundles of services and goods which are not directly comparable and are not exactly the same. So again, it gets you away from having to compete on price. Now, the reason you need to get away from competing on price is down to this thing, your demand curve, which is some basic economics. And what this says is that generally the more you charge, the less you'll sell, and if you lower your prices, you'd expect to sell more. It's not always the case, because sometimes you can put your prices up and put yourself into a higher quality or a higher luxury market, if you like, and actually sell more. But generally this relationship holds true. But the trouble is, you don't know what it looks like. All you know is where you are now. So you know what your current price is and what your current sales volume is. You don't know what would happen if you put your prices up or if you lower them. So for example, if you're really competing with your competitors on price, then you've got what's called elastic demand. What that means is if you put your prices up a little bit, you'll lose a significant amount of sales quantity. And if you lower your prices, you would gain quantity. Now the trouble is, that means therefore that if you put your prices up, you'll lose volume, which means that you can't really do it. And if you lower your prices, although you would gain market share, you're probably operating on very low margins already, because everyone's driven the price down in your marketplace. And so two things could happen. One, you could start to make a loss even though you've captured market share because your margins are very small. And secondly, if your competitors also lower their prices, then everyone's even worse off. So this doesn't really work if you've got elastic demand, which is where you're competing on price and you're seen as what's called a commodity. The only way around that is you've got to be perceived by your customers as being better than the competition, more specialist, more expert. How can you do that? Well, there's only three ways you can do that. One is to target your ideal customer more closely and to market what you do and sell to their what's called their hot button, their major issue, problem or concern. So the more clearly you can identify what makes your ideal customer buy and who your ideal customer is, the more you can be perceived as being the expert or the specialist in that market, and that will increase your perceived value. The second thing you can do is to tweak your product, service, benefits in order to constantly innovate your business and constantly be providing better value. And the third thing you can do is communicate better what your internal reality is to the external world. And that involves marketing yourself better, getting your message across better. All three of those things will mean that you will now be perceived as better, and that will mean that you can charge a higher price. And not only that, you can actually put your prices up and make more profit even though you sell a bit less, because proportionately you don't drop in volume very much when you raise your prices, and you can actually make more profit selling less, in fact. Now let's look at another very important concept, which is called your break-even point. Your break-even point basically says that there are three things you need to know about. One are your fixed costs, the costs that don't change as and when you produce and sell more. Two, your variable costs, which are the costs that do go up directly in line with how much you produce and sell. So the fixed costs would be things like business rates, mortgage costs, head office wages and salaries, for example, basic wages and salaries, whereas the variable costs would be things like materials, components, bonus costs, overtime rates, commission costs, license costs, etc. Your sales income is made up of basically your total sales revenue, so it's what you sell your goods for times the quantity that you sell. So if you sell 100 things at £10 each, your sales revenue will be 100 times 10, which is £1,000. Now let's put some figures on. So if your fixed overheads were 50,000 and it costs you £10 a unit to make what you sell, and you sell it for £20 a unit, the way you work out your break-even point is you would divide your fixed costs by the difference between the total revenue per item and the variable cost per item. And if you do that, you would divide £50,000 by the difference between the £20 you sell for and the £10 it costs to make it. And that would tell you that 50,000 divided by £10 gives you 5,000 units, which tells you that if you sell 5,000 units, you'll stop making a loss and start to make a profit. And you can draw this on a chart. So you plot your 50,000 fixed costs as a horizontal line across. Your unit variable costs go up in line with output and sales. Your revenue goes up in line with sales. You add on the unit cost, variable cost to the fixed cost to get this green line, which is your total costs. And where the total revenue starts to exceed the total cost, that's called your break-even point. Down here you're making a loss, up here you're making a profit. Now, once you know these figures, it gets very interesting, because now if you make small improvements in each of those three key variables, you can make a huge difference to your business in relatively quick time. So let me just show you how this could work. Let's say we save 10% off our fixed overheads and get them down to 45,000, and we save £10 on our variable cost per unit to get it down to £9, and we put our prices up 10%, because what we're doing is we're marketing ourselves better and we're providing better perceived value. Our break-even point would now be £45,000 divided by 22 minus 9, which is £13, which comes to 3462 units instead of the previous 5,000, which means we can break even selling 31% less volume, as here. But what it also means is that at the previous volume, i.e. at 5,000 units instead of 3462 units, we would actually now be making a profit of £20,000, and it looks like this. So there's our lower break-even point, and now you'll see this is where we were previously breaking even, and we now make a profit of £20,000 just under. Very powerful and can work for any business. If you want more information or free reports or resources, if you go to exponentialgrowthforyou.com, you can download various free templates and reports, or you could email me at info@exponentialgrowthforyou.com. So this is Bernard Keevy, and I hope you found that useful and helpful in terms of how you set your prices.